your name spoken with the intent to see you fall. And yet, instead of destroying you, that very act became the reason your enemies watched you rise. What if I told you that somewhere, in a room you've never seen, your photo was placed into the hands of a devil? When we speak of the reality of unseen battles, we are acknowledging that the visible world, the one we can touch, measure, and photograph, is only the thinnest layer of existence. It is the surface of a deep ocean shimmering under the sun, but concealing vast movements beneath. Most people live as if the surface is all there is. They orient themselves to the light they can see and the wind they can feel, never suspecting that tides, currents, and creatures of great power move unseen in the depths. Yet, every ancient wisdom, every whisper of the soul, and even the unspoken fears we carry testify that this is not so. There is another world, interwoven with ours, invisible but no less real. In that world, allegiances are drawn with an unbreakable clarity. There is no neutrality. Light and darkness are not abstract principles, but active, deliberate forces, intelligent and aware, shaping, guiding, and influencing the affairs of men. There is no territory of the human heart so small that it does not belong to one side or the other. To imagine that we are alone, that our choices and our lives unfold in a kind of cosmic emptiness, is to be lulled by the enemy into a false security. For if you believe the war is not real, you will not arm yourself for it. The conflict is not one of equal powers clashing in uncertain outcome. Darkness does not contend with light as an equal adversary. It is more like the shadow cast by a candle, utterly dependent on the flame for its existence, powerless without the light it seeks to oppose. And yet, because we are free to choose, that darkness wages relentless campaigns to draw us into its fold. It whispers in secret, sows seeds of doubt, and tries to wrap the mind in illusions that make evil appear reasonable and truth seem inconvenient. This is why the chosen, those set apart by God's will, find themselves pressed harder than others. If you carry no light, the shadows will leave you alone. But if you carry the spark of heaven within you, the opposition becomes inevitable. You may never see the faces of your enemies. Their hands may never touch you directly. But in the hidden realms, your name is spoken. In those courts of darkness, your image may be passed like a wanted poster. They may plot over the path of your life, attempt to arrange your downfall, and seek permission to strike. It is in this hidden theater that your greatest battles are fought. They are not waged with swords and shields, but with faith, obedience, and the quiet perseverance of holding your ground when you do not understand the forces moving against you. Many are unaware that the sudden heaviness in their soul, the inexplicable resistance in their plans, or the unexplainable malice of certain people can be the ripples of these unseen skirmishes. Like the wind that rattles the windows on a still night, the source is invisible, but the effects are real. Here lies a sobering truth. Those who conspire against you in the visible often have help from the invisible. Just as a faithful servant of God may be aided by angels, those given over to darkness may be stirred and guided by powers that are not flesh and blood. And yet, for all their schemes, there is an immovable law in the kingdom of God. The one who is sealed by his will cannot be taken without his consent. The enemy can petition, accuse, and threaten, but he cannot overstep the line that heaven has drawn. This is not a battle to frighten you, but to awaken you. Fear belongs to those who walk unaware, who drift through life unarmored. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity brings preparation. When you know the ocean is deep and filled with movement, you sail differently. You keep watch. You set your course with intention. You respect the currents even as you resist them. The reality of unseen battles is not meant to make us tremble at the power of darkness, but to stand in awe of the sovereignty of the One who holds all realms in his hands. The visible world may be noisy with accusations, rumors, and human plots, but the true theater of your life is not the headlines of men. It is the stage of eternity, where the light has already secured the victory, and where your very existence is a testimony that you are worth fighting for. To understand why those marked by God's purpose attract such intense opposition, we must first grasp what it means to be chosen. It is not a title of comfort, nor is it a badge for display. To be chosen is to be set apart for a mission that will inevitably disrupt the plans of darkness. It is to carry something rare, something eternal, something that, if allowed to flourish, will undo years of the enemy's labor in a single moment of obedience. That kind of potential is never ignored by the forces that oppose it. In the unseen realm, the chosen are not anonymous. They are recognized by the seal upon their lives, a mark invisible to human eyes, but impossible to hide from spiritual sight. It is as if the moment you are appointed for a divine purpose, a light is lit over you in the spiritual landscape, and that light draws attention. The darkness does not waste its resources on the indifferent or the idle. It does not trouble itself over those who walk aimlessly, for they are already drifting in the direction it desires. But those who have been given a divine assignment, even if they do not yet fully know it themselves, become a strategic threat. The enemy calculates the cost of allowing them to grow unhindered and concludes that early interference is the best tactic. This is why, for some, the storms seem to begin long before they have taken their first deliberate step toward their calling. From the moment they are conceived, the opposition begins. Sometimes this targeting is not dramatic. It can be subtle, woven into the circumstances of a life so that it feels almost ordinary. It may appear as repeated setbacks, relationships poisoned by inexplicable tension, or doors that close just when the path seems clear. At other times, it is more overt: hostility without cause, betrayal by those who once claimed loyalty, sudden surges of accusation or slander that have no root in truth. The chosen often live in the paradox of being pursued and yet preserved, harassed but not defeated. One reason the chosen face heightened opposition is that the enemy fears momentum. The earlier he can frustrate, discourage, or confuse, the less chance there is that the chosen one will reach the stage where their influence multiplies. Like a seed that, if allowed to sprout, will produce a forest, the chosen one's potential is exponential. It is far easier to crush a seed than to fell a fully grown tree. So the enemy moves swiftly, sometimes even before the chosen understands their own identity. This reality also explains why attacks often come through unexpected avenues. The enemy is not creative in nature, but he is observant. He studies patterns, weaknesses, and relationships. He may not be able to destroy the chosen outright, but he can attempt to surround them with voices that weaken their resolve. Friends may turn distant, Mentors may become silent, and those meant to encourage may instead plant seeds of doubt. Even so, these tactics can never entirely succeed, for the chosen are not sustained by human approval, but by divine appointment. It is also important to recognize that the chosen are not targeted merely for who they are, but for what they carry. Their life is a vessel for assignments, messages, and breakthroughs that extend far beyond their own story. To hinder one chosen one is, in effect, to hinder all those who would have been reached through them. The enemy's strategy is rarely personal in sentiment, but it is deeply personal in execution. He will use specific memories, wounds, or fears to create the illusion that the opposition is about the person themselves, when in truth it is about the mission they have been entrusted with. For those who are chosen, this reality can be disorienting. They may wonder why certain battles are theirs to fight, why their path is strewn with more thorns than others, why even moments of peace seem fleeting before the next wave crashes in. But these patterns are not evidence of abandonment. They are proof of importance. The chosen are often unaware of how many times they have been protected from unseen harm, how many schemes have been dismantled before they could reach them, and how many attacks have been turned aside by the hand of God before they even felt the wind of them. The targeting of the chosen is a backhanded confirmation. It is the enemy's unwilling testimony that there is something worth fearing in the life of the one who walks with God. The opposition itself becomes evidence that the calling is real, the mission significant, and the outcome worth fighting for. The futility of curses against God's plan begins with the unshakable truth that what God has decreed cannot be overturned by any force, whether earthly or spiritual. From the beginning of time, the Creator's word has held absolute authority. When he speaks, reality bends to match his will. No spell, no charm, no whispered malice in the dark can rewrite the script that heaven has already written. The enemy may try to imitate power, to present himself as one who can determine fate, but all his influence is confined within boundaries he did not set and cannot move. He is like a prisoner shaking the bars of his cell, loud enough to frighten the unprepared, but still entirely contained by the authority of God. This truth is often hidden during moments of attack. When someone places your name before darkness, when they hand over your photo to be cursed, when they summon spirits against you, it can feel as though the balance has shifted in their favor. It is tempting to imagine these acts as decisive blows, but in reality, they are empty gestures when measured against the immensity of God's sovereignty. A curse is only as potent as the permission it is given, and in the case of the one chosen and protected by God, permission is denied before the enemy even begins his work. The history of divine protection is written into the stories of those who have walked faithfully before us. Time and again, enemies have plotted, kings have signed decrees, entire armies have been mobilized, and yet the one under God's covering emerges untouched. This is not because the danger was not real or the threat not serious, but because the threat was never greater than the one who guarded them. It is in these moments that the limitations of evil are exposed. Darkness can attempt, but it cannot complete. It can threaten, but it cannot fulfill its threat against a life hidden in the will of God. When people act in malice, bringing offerings to evil on your behalf, They are often convinced of their own power. They believe the ritual is enough, that the symbols they employ can bind you, that the words they speak can harm you. But they overlook a critical reality. The power they call upon is still subject to the voice that spoke creation into being. No demon, no principality, no unseen ruler of darkness can bypass the authority of the One who is both the beginning and the end. Even in the unseen realm, hierarchy is real, and God sits at the highest place. There is a mystery in how God sometimes responds to these acts of spiritual aggression. In some cases, he allows the enemy to begin his advance, only to halt him in full view of all involved, demonstrating his power. At other times, he dismantles the plan in secret, so completely that the chosen one remains unaware of how close danger truly was. Either way, the result is the same. The curse returns empty, its fangs pulled, its venom neutralized. Often it is the sender of the curse who ends up entangled in the very snare they laid for another. A poetic reversal that reveals how powerless evil is when it tries to confront God's decree. It is important to understand that God's protection is not always about removing the presence of danger, but about nullifying its effect. You may walk through situations that by all logic should have destroyed you, only to emerge without even the scent of smoke upon you. The weapons may indeed be formed, as Scripture says, but they will not prosper. That is not because the enemy is incapable of forming them, but because God has already ruled that they cannot succeed against His will. This distinction matters because it reframes the way we interpret hardship. Presence of attack does not equal absence of protection. Those who belong to God walk with an unseen shield, a covering that cannot be pierced except by His own allowance. And when He allows something to touch us, it is never for our destruction but for our shaping. Even then, He sets the limits, ensuring that the outcome will still serve His greater plan. The enemy can aim at you, but he cannot touch your destiny. Your calling is not fragile glass that can shatter under pressure. It is forged steel, tempered in the fire of God's own intention. So when curses are spoken, when threats are made, when shadows seem to move against you, remember that these are not the final words over your life. The final word belongs to the One who called you, who knows the end from the beginning, and whose plans for you stand forever. The futility of curses is not merely a hopeful thought. It is a reality built into the very nature of God's supremacy. What is meant for your downfall, becoming the very tool of your vindication, is one of the most extraordinary signatures of God's work. It is not merely that He blocks the enemy's plans, but that He has the power to repurpose them, transforming the very instruments forged for your harm into the means by which His favor is displayed. This is a truth that runs like a golden thread through the stories of the faithful. The pit dug for the righteous becomes the grave for the wicked. The weapon raised in malice becomes the testimony of protection, and the schemes intended to destroy are woven into the tapestry of deliverance. When a photo of you is placed in the hands of darkness, the intent is clear. It is a request for harm, a call for spiritual interference. To those who believe in such acts, the image becomes a point of contact, a way to direct spiritual hostility toward your life. But what they do not know is that in the hands of God, even the chosen's likeness is a banner of ownership. Instead of being a map for the enemy's attack, it becomes a proclamation in the unseen realm that you belong to the Most High. The very thing meant to connect you to destruction can become a reminder to every principality and power that they cannot cross the line drawn by your protector. God's ability to reverse the enemy's weapon is not just defensive, it is creative. He does not simply neutralize the danger, he flips the meaning entirely. Consider how Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, believing they were erasing him from the story. In reality, they were setting the stage for his rise to a position where he would save them all. The betrayal was real. The pain was deep, but God's intervention turned the betrayal into the bridge that carried Joseph into his destiny. This is the pattern: the stone rolled to block your path becomes the stepping stone to higher ground. The same principle applies in the realm of spiritual attack. A curse spoken over you may become the trigger for unexpected blessing, not because the curse had power, but because God chooses to let the attempt become a catalyst for your promotion. The enemy's actions, driven by hatred, can be redirected to accomplish the opposite of their intention. When someone tries to stir up fear in your life, God can use the very situation to deepen your faith and anchor your trust in Him, making you less vulnerable to fear in the future. When a scheme is designed to isolate you, He can use it to separate you from harmful influences you did not yet recognize, freeing you to grow stronger. The reversal is often poetic in its justice. Those who attempt to harm you may end up watching their plans collapse under the weight of God's hand. The snare they laid may spring back upon them, not because you sought vengeance, but because the laws of the spiritual realm carry consequences. Evil has a way of circling back to its source when it cannot find a rightful target. And when this happens, it becomes a living testimony, not only to you but to all who witness, that no one can curse what God has blessed. This transformation of harm into good also changes the way the chosen walk through trials. Instead of trembling at every threat, they begin to look for God's hand in the situation. It becomes a quiet confidence if the enemy is stirring. It may be because God is preparing to reveal something greater. The very presence of opposition can be read as a sign that the story is moving toward a turning point. This is not arrogance. It is the fruit of seeing God do again and again what only He can, turning graves into gardens, chains into crowns, and curses into confirmations of His care. Sometimes the reversal is immediate and visible. Other times it is hidden, unfolding over months or years until you look back and see clearly how the moment of intended harm became the doorway to greater blessing. Either way, the outcome remains the same. The weapon formed against you is not just stopped, it is reclaimed, reshaped, and made to serve the purposes of God in your life. The enemy's greatest frustration is not that his plans are stopped, but that they are made to work against him, testifying to his own defeat. The chosen walk under this promise, not that they will never be targeted, but that every targeting is an opportunity for God to display His supremacy. The enemy may think he is writing your downfall, but he is unknowingly drafting the opening lines of your victory. And when the story is told, it will be clear to all that what was meant to bury, you became the very proof that you were always in the hands of the one who cannot be overthrown. There is a certain mystery in the way God chooses to protect His own. At times, we expect protection to mean the complete removal of danger, the vanishing of every shadow before it can draw near. Yet, there are moments when God does something different. He does not destroy the enemy, but turns him the other way. It is as if the adversary arrives on the battlefield fully armed, with every intention of harm, only to find himself suddenly confused, disoriented, and compelled to walk in the opposite direction. This is not the absence of power on God's part. It is the display of a higher kind of power, the kind that bends the will of the opposition without ever breaking a single divine promise. Sometimes, the enemy's destruction is not the most effective testimony of God's sovereignty. If He were to strike down every threat before it reached you, there would be less opportunity to reveal that even your enemies are subject to His command. It is a greater humiliation for the enemy to be seen obeying God against his will than to be erased from the scene entirely. Imagine the one sent to curse you instead speaking words of blessing, the hand raised against you suddenly working for your good, the lips that plotted your downfall opening only to testify to your favor. Such reversals are not accidents. They are deliberate acts of God designed to show the watching world that His authority is absolute. In the unseen realm, there are accounts of such redirections. There are moments when someone, filled with malice, seeks a spiritual power to work against you, only to find that the very spirit they call upon cannot touch you. Bound by the limits of God's decree, that spirit may turn on the sender, or worse for them, be forced to act in ways that strengthen you instead of weakening you. In such cases, the opposition is not merely silenced, it is enlisted into a purpose it despises. There is no deeper defeat for darkness than to become an instrument of the light it sought to extinguish. This paradox of divine protection is written into the stories of the faithful. Consider how Balaam, summoned to curse Israel, opened his mouth and found blessings spilling out instead. The enemy's strategy was to secure spiritual harm, but the moment he encountered God's boundary, the plan reversed entirely. Balaam's presence, intended to wound, became the very channel through which God declared His favor over His people. The hired voice of cursing became the trumpet of blessing, and no one present could deny that a greater hand was at work. There is a humbling reality for the chosen in this. God is not always in a hurry to remove your enemies. Sometimes He keeps them near just long enough to turn them into unwilling witnesses of your preservation. Their inability to harm you becomes a living reminder, to them, to you, and to all watching, that the authority over your life rests entirely with God. This can be more powerful than simple deliverance, for it leaves no doubt about where your protection comes from. And while such protection can be miraculous, it is also often subtle. You may never know how many times someone set themselves against you, only to be redirected before their plan could touch you. The phone call that never came, the meeting that was inexplicably cancelled, the door that was quietly closed before danger could enter. These can all be instances of the enemy being turned away without your awareness. God is not obligated to show you every detail of your defense. Sometimes the greatest mercy is in letting you rest without knowing how many arrows He has already deflected. The paradox also teaches the chosen to walk without fear, Knowing that God can use even your enemy to serve his purpose strips away the anxiety of wondering who is against you. You begin to understand that no matter how fierce the opposition, it can only operate under God's supervision. If he chooses to turn it aside, it will miss you entirely. If he chooses to turn it toward you, it will arrive emptied of its intended harm and full instead of unexpected good. It is a strange and wondrous thing to live under such covering. You do not need to keep count of your enemies, for they may be made to work for your benefit without even realizing it. You do not need to fear the schemes of darkness, for they may be rewritten mid-course to carry light. This is the paradox of divine protection, that sometimes God's greatest victories are not won by removing the threat, but by making the threat serve the very one it sought to destroy. In such moments, the chosen do not merely survive. They stand as living proof that all things, even the plans of the enemy, can be made to work together for the purposes of the one who reigns over every realm. The testimony of the chosen is never merely about enduring hardship. It is about what that endurance declares to every realm, seen and unseen. To be chosen is to live a life that becomes a message, one that speaks louder than any sermon you could preach. Every season you survive, every trap you escape, every battle you win under impossible odds is not just a personal victory. It is a public proclamation of God's authority over your life. In the natural world, this testimony reaches the eyes and ears of people around you. But in the spiritual world, it resounds like a trumpet, reminding both angels and demons that you are untouchable until your mission is complete. When God sets you apart, he does not simply protect you for your own comfort. He preserves you so that your very existence becomes evidence of his sovereignty. The chosen are living proof that no power, however ancient or cunning, can overturn what God has established. In this way, your life is not only about the fulfillment of your personal calling, it is about the demonstration of a principle, that those who belong to him are governed by his will alone. This truth is not whispered in the shadows, it is displayed in plain sight, often through circumstances so improbable that they cannot be explained without acknowledging God's hand. Your testimony begins to form long before you realize it. The seasons when you were unaware of your own calling, when you stumbled through confusion and pain, are often the very chapters that later testify most powerfully. Those who watch you from the outside may think they are witnessing random events, but in the unseen realm, each moment of preservation is carefully recorded. There are victories you don't even know you have, because the battle was fought and won before the danger ever reached you. And when you finally step into the fullness of your purpose, those invisible records become part of your spiritual credibility. This testimony also serves as a warning to the enemy. Every failed attempt against you adds to a history of defeat in his ledger. The more he tries and fails, the more his own forces are reminded that you are not an ordinary target. Even those who once participated in schemes against you may come to realize that opposing you is an exercise in futility. Their recognition is not born out of respect for you personally, but out of an unwilling admission that you are shielded by a power they cannot touch. For the chosen, the testimony is not about boasting in strength, for the strength is not theirs to boast of. It is about pointing, again and again, to the source of their preservation. When you have been rescued in ways that defy explanation, the only honest response is to give credit where it is due. And in doing so, your story becomes an invitation for others to trust the same God who has carried you. What began as a private battle becomes a public beacon, drawing others out of fear and into faith. The beauty of this testimony is that it grows sharper and more compelling with time. Each new challenge met with God's deliverance adds another layer of credibility. You become not only a witness to His faithfulness, but also a walking record of it. Those who meet you in later seasons cannot imagine the battles you have fought, yet they see in you the evidence of having been kept. Your words carry weight because they are backed by survival. Your counsel carries power because it is rooted in proof. Even in moments when you feel small or unnoticed, the testimony is still active. The spiritual world does not measure significance by human applause. The mere fact that you remain standing, when so many have tried to push you down, is itself a declaration of divine authority. Your survival becomes a silent sermon that echoes across realms. God's chosen cannot be removed from the earth a moment before their appointed time. And when the time finally comes for your mission to be complete, it will not be because the enemy succeeded, but because the one who sent you has called you home. Until then, your life will continue to speak, sometimes in whispers of quiet endurance, sometimes in shouts of miraculous deliverance, but always with the same message: you are here by God's will, and nothing in heaven or hell can alter that fact. That is the testimony of the chosen, and it is written not in ink, but in the living, breathing story of your days. In the end, the story of the chosen one is not about the darkness that pursued them, nor about the malice of those who tried to hand them over to destruction. It is about the God who sat above it all, unshaken, turning every scheme into a stepping stone, every curse into a confirmation, every enemy into an unwitting herald of His power. The battles, both seen and unseen, were never meant to break you. They were the stage on which heaven would display its supremacy. You stand here not because the enemy ran out of strength, but because God never lifted His hand from your life, and now your very existence speaks to every realm that watches. No plot can erase a destiny written by the author of life. No shadow can swallow a soul lit by His flame, and no devil can hold what God has claimed as His own. You are here, still chosen, still preserved, still advancing, not by chance, but by the unshakable will of the one who called you from the beginning.